Welcome to Love Thy Lawyer, where we talk with attorneys about their lives and careers. I'm Louis Goodman. Today, we welcome Alameda County Deputy District Attorney Harlan Simon to the podcast. Harlan's worked as both a civil and criminal practitioner, and he's worked as a deputy public defender and as a deputy district attorney. He's tried over 75 cases to jury verdict. But perhaps most impressive is that he is a master glass maker and an instructor of the craft. Harlan Simon, welcome to Love Thy Lawyer.
Welcome, Louis. Thank you for having me on.
Well, it's a pleasure to talk to you. I met you some years ago, and I was recently so pleasantly surprised to walk into court and see you sitting in the seat closer to the jury box as a deputy district attorney in Alameda County. So it's always fun seeing you.
Thank you, Louis. It's been quite an odyssey for me. Sometimes I have to pinch myself that this is real.
Well, speaking of reality, where are you working right now? What's your assignment in the district attorney's office right now?
So I'm in the Wiley Manual building where we recently saw each other. My office is on the second floor in the DA's office there, and it's located near Jack London Square.
What sort of cases are you handling right now for the district attorney?
I'm in the disposition court, which was created in the aftermath of COVID to reduce case backlogs. And when cases come to Department 113 in front of Judge Gloria Rines, they are already sort of shaped and fitted for resolution. And then I preside over their resolutions as the people's representative.
How long have you been in this assignment?
It's been maybe 2 or 3 months. Prior to that, I was with my immediate supervisor, Jason Quinn, and I was in Department 108, which is the master calendar misdemeanor court, where cases come for arraignment and pretrial hearing.
Where are you from originally, Harlan?
Louis, I am from Los Angeles, actually the San Fernando Valley, just to the north of the city, still within Los Angeles County, a place called Sherman Oaks.
Is that where you went to high school?
It is. Well, high school was in North Hollywood, just adjacent. I went to U.S. Grant High School in North Hollywood, in the San Fernando Valley.
Now, when you graduated from U.S. Grant, you went to college. Where'd you go to college?
I went to UC San Diego.
And how was that experience for you?
Amazing. I loved it. It was like a burst of fresh life where people were admired, respected, celebrated for what they knew and how they thought. Yeah, I loved UC San Diego. It was great. It was a whole new world of academic journey. Language, math, chemistry, physics, the humanities, sociology, on a beautiful campus in La Jolla overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It's one of the top science schools in the nation.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a school that has different colleges within the university. Is that correct?
Right. Just like Santa Cruz, like a lot of the UCs, they've subdivided their overall campus up into smaller sort of satellite colleges.
At some point, you graduated from college and then you went to law school. Did you take some time off between college and law school, or did you go directly through?
I took a year off from graduating, not at UC San Diego, but graduating to a transfer school. After 2 years at UC San Diego, I did education abroad in France under UC's auspices in Grenoble, and returned to Colorado College, which is a liberal arts school. It's private compared to UC, obviously, which is public. And I graduated from there. And upon graduation, I went and worked at a ski area in Alta, Utah. I waited on tables and I cleaned rooms.
Did you go skiing?
Yeah, in my off days, I did. And it was right as Walkman were coming into vogue. And I had some peak experiences going through the magnificent Utah powder, freshly fallen, listening to Pink Floyd.
At what point did you decide that you wanted to be a lawyer and that you wanted to apply to law school?
I think it was as I was going through my history and political theory major at Colorado College. I guess it's a natural to be thinking about law school at that point with those subject matter. And I guess I wasn't completely convinced, but I had an uncle. Uncle Arnold told me when he heard the news that I was thinking about going to a yeshiva in Israel to study, because I didn't know very much about my background, my heritage. And I've been a person who believes it's important to not reject things out of ignorance. And I wanted to learn more. So he heard I wanted to go to yeshiva, and he said, Harlan, being ever so practical, don't go to a yeshiva, go to an American yeshiva, go to law school. And so
That's funny.
Well, there's a huge relationship, and, in terms of the origin and development of law, and difference in the legal systems, but a lot of similarity too. So it was a natural thing for me to do, and that's what I did.
So which legal yeshiva did you go to?
Well, I went to NYU, almost literally. It had a wonderful student body, and many people were from yeshivas who were now studying American law. Many of my friends and roommates were yarmulke-wearing Orthodox Jews, and for a time I was as well.
That must have been quite a transition, going from the West Coast and a little time in Colorado and some time in Utah to all of a sudden being in the heart of Greenwich Village, in the heart of Manhattan.
It was a shock. I had a big green nylon backpack on when I first showed up in Washington Square at my dorm room. My hair was down to my shoulders. I had a beard. I looked like a mountain man. I knocked on the door. It opened, and there was my roommate. I think he was smoking a cigarette. The fluorescent light bathed him in an eerie glow, and he was eating Entenmann's chocolate chip cookies. And my very first instinct, I love Entenmann's. I didn't really know the brand, but my first instinct was, oh, I'm in the wrong place. Mountain man meets smoke and city and fluorescent light in a tiny little New York dorm room.
You didn't have this sort of like I love New York feeling right away, right at that moment?
No, it was a shock, and especially the cigarette smoking. So that was one of the first things that we got an understanding about.
Well, how did things work out at NYU, and what was your experience there like over the next few years?
Louis, it was unremittingly good. I just loved new experiences, and I adapted quickly to New York City. I learned how to focus because there's so much diversion, so much distraction. The Big Apple is just one of the great cities on earth, as is San Francisco, as is Paris, as is Berlin, as is Bangkok. But I just enjoyed immensely, and the location of NYU down in the Village, probably the best location to go to school or graduate school anywhere in Manhattan. I chose Manhattan as a place for law school because it was sort of a financial capital of the country. And I thought too, with all the crime shows and the mob and everything, that it also was kind of a big center of criminal activity. And what better place to go to law school than there?
When you graduated from law school, what was your first legal job?
Upon graduation, I went to the public defender's office in Los Angeles. And the theory was, no matter what I wanted to do, it would be best to get trial experience under my belt. And the other thing is I'd had a corporate experience working as a clerk during the summer in law school for a large corporate firm, and it did not ring my bells. So I thought that the fast action of a state court and in a kind of math-like trial setting would be a really good thing for me to do. And that's what I did.
So how was your experience in the Los Angeles County Public Defender's Office?
I don't want to use too many superlatives, but it was amazing. I hope your listeners can appreciate it was exhilarating from the very beginning, dealing with issues of life and liberty, punishment, poverty, deprivation, degradation. And being a public defender, I saw it all. From downtown LA to where I was posted in my last 2 years as a public defender down in Compton, which is further south of South Central.
Now you're working at the Alameda County District Attorney's Office. I'm wondering if you could just kind of briefly bring us through the career process from Los Angeles PD to Alameda County DA.
After so many trials in the PD's office, I needed a break. I basically kind of burned out. And so I traveled. I took time off. I traveled to Asia. Up until then, I had been Eurocentric in my travels. Italy, France, Berlin. But I didn't know a whole lot about Asia. And I guess I also admitted that during law school, I worked at the U.S. Attorney's Office. My view of the adversary process made me kind of wonder at the time, at the end of that clerkship, whether I might not be more satisfied or happy with work that was not adversarial. So I signed in for, it wasn't too late, but I signed up for an MBA degree as a joint degree with the law degree at NYU. They offer a joint program and you get 1 year off. So instead of 3 years plus 2 years, it's 3 plus 1. So I graduated with an MBA, and I decided, it was easier and better to start doing law than to go into business. It would be easier to go from law to business. But meanwhile, I finished the law practice with the public defender. I traveled to Asia. I got onto this vein of thought because Asia was it was a growing part of the world economically. And in business school, I studied it. And I kind of fashioned myself as a liberally educated person. And I thought that no well-rounded liberal education would be complete without understanding business and also without understanding the rise of Asia. I went to Japan. I call it Burma, but Myanmar. I went to Thailand. I was in Hong Kong, Singapore, Indonesia. And within Indonesia, it's an archipelago of many, many islands. And the big one is Java. I traveled by rail overland in Java to Bali and spent a fair amount of time also in Bali.
So you come back from Asia, and then where does your career take you?
When I got back from Asia, I had a phone message waiting for me. My dad had given it to me that there was a district attorney that I knew from Compton, and he had gotten in trouble, and he wanted to know if I would represent him. So I connected with him, and I took on the case, and that began my private practice post-public defender. He was somebody who I had as an opponent multiple trials and, daily dealings almost on other cases. And he had chosen me, I guess, because he knew what I was capable of. And in the case of this person, it worked out. It was touch and go for a while, but I used a disfavored defense, that is jury nullification. The charge was possession of a gun in a courthouse. And he was acquitted, Lou. And to this day, he's working as a deputy district attorney in Los Angeles County. So I'm very proud of that. He's a good guy. He was doing gang prosecution. At the time, it was hard to get carry permits in Los Angeles. It may still be, I don't know. But he was concerned for his life and felt it necessary to be armed. He was prosecuting gang murder cases. And the district attorney's office, the administrative staff, they all had connections to the community. And so even though the building was secure, it had metal detectors, it was somewhat porous because weapons could be snuck in through staff. For example, on the case that my client had been trying, the witness list mysteriously disappeared from the DA computers. A detective had been slow in bringing evidence to court, and my client found out that the detective was related to one of the gang members. So that was the backdrop for his foolish leaving of a coat with a gun in the courthouse cafeteria. And that's how it got discovered. And then the case was turned over to the attorney general because the DA typically won't prosecute their own.
How did you happen to get involved in the Alameda County District Attorney's Office?
I had been commuting to Marin. That was my first post-COVID foray into the law. My craft shows that I'd been doing for a number of years with my glass work and my artisanal jewelry design, that had kind of dropped off a cliff. And I was sort of hunkering down in, my house, sheltering in place. And after a while, and after the vaccines became available, I started to realize something that had been in me for many, many years, which was to go back to criminal law and to go back to the rough and tumble of it. Amazingly happy doing it. I loved it. And there are many reasons why, the same reasons you probably like it, the people orientation, the issues, the intellectual challenge. But I began prospecting for work, for law work. And I was very fortunate to be hired by the county of Marin as a contract district attorney. And that's where I did my very first trial as a prosecutor, and where I kind of reacquainted myself with the whole process of criminal law. And the thing that was kind of crazy and different is that between then and when I had last left criminal law, 20 plus years had elapsed, and so much was different in criminal law. For example, body-worn cameras. They were not a thing back when I was a public defender or when I was doing private practice in Los Angeles. Cell phone downloads, that was not a thing. Surveillance, ubiquitous surveillance cameras like Ring or anything, that was hardly a thing. Basically what existed, there were forensic tools, fingerprints and DNA somewhat, but for the most part, it would be like tape recorded statements, and that was the extent of it. Then on a case management side, that too was completely different, where everything is in Marin, they had gone from a paper system to a digital system with a program called Darwin. Just like in Oakland or Alameda County, we have a program called RD3. These are platforms that carry a lot of information. And for Marin, that electronic platform served as the sole record keeping and workflow management for the misdemeanor cases. And that's the area that I worked in initially.
And then you came from Marin County over to Alameda County in the prosecutor's office?
Correct. The opportunity presented, and I gave up the 50-minute Richmond Bridge drive to now a little bit more than 13 minutes.
Well, that's a big improvement.
Oh, it is. The thing that's sad about it is I don't get to listen to nearly as many podcasts.
Do you notice any difference in terms of the way the system works in Marin County versus the way it works in Alameda County?
That's a really good question. I don't notice that much of a difference. I think the Marin office was relatively progressive and enlightened. The DAs I worked with were, to a person, humane and reasonable. I think settlements were and are a little stricter, but I think that the whole system got shocked by COVID. For example, incarceration, the de-incarceration movement got a huge boost with COVID because sentences for locking people up went away for the minor crimes, as they should. And that kind of attitude still continued once COVID began letting up. And that was the case certainly in Marin. And I see it everywhere in Alameda County in the courthouse that I practice in. I also, when I was in Southern California practicing, the bench was wonderful. I had favorite judges, of course. Many of them were Republican appointees, Wilson and Deukmejian, and we've now had Democratic governors for a long time, and the composition or complexion of the bench has changed. I've been so impressed with the quality of judges, both those that I experienced in Marin and the judges I'm encountering now in Alameda County. I'm awed by how good they are.
You have had a number of different experiences in your adult life, and yet you keep coming back to practicing law on some level. I'm wondering what it is about the law that keeps you in this practice.
I love the life of mind. I went finally to Colorado College, which celebrated liberal arts education, Enlightenment values, thought, rational thought, but not at the expense of spirituality either. And the law to me represents this vast architecture, very cumbersome, clunky, sometimes terribly overdone in terms of statutory construction. But it's an attempt to reduce conflict in society. And I love that challenge. I love the idea of taking a fact pattern, a real life situation, and seeing how it either fits or doesn't fit into a criminal violation where somebody's been harmed.
If a young person were just coming out of college thinking about law as a career choice, would you recommend going into the law?
It depends on the person. I would recommend kicking the tires, shadowing somebody, maybe finding 3 different practitioners who have 3 different kinds of practices, because law is really, really varied in all its subspecialties. That would be my advice to a young person who is interested in pursuing a career in law. Make sure it's a good fit.
What do you think's the best advice you've ever received?
Well, there's the traditional ones. Persist. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. When you're beaten, pick yourself up and try again. And then I think overall is integrity. Have integrity and be authentic. It's better. I think it leads to a better outcome for the client and for the people. And it allows for better working relations between adversaries.
Do you think the legal system is fair?
No, I don't, Louis.
Why not?
Well, I think that life is not fair. I think that overall, where we're born, who our parents are, what our genes are, all of these are, sort of random. And, we could be born into some very impoverished place that's being bombed, and not our fault, and that would be our lot. And so life is not fair. And then the legal system, it's part of life. And so it too is going to reflect unfairnesses. Obviously, money plays a part, health plays a part. The major unfairness I see in the day-to-day around me is just how much how many mental health issues there are. We're not addressing that in a very wise way.
I'm going to shift gears here a little bit. What's your family life been like, and how has practicing law and your family life fit in with each other?
For me, it's kind of a weird situation because when my kids were growing up, I was home. I worked on weekends at craft shows. So I was able to take them to school, make them sandwiches, play with them after school, and kind of be almost like a house husband or stay-at-home dad. And then I would work in my shop at night or when they were at school in between. That was just kind of a good pattern in terms of there wasn't a conflict. And my wife was the one who was working the regular job. And now the roles are reversed. I'm the one who has the day-to-day. But my kids are grown up. They left the house and now they're back again for however long they want. But, I'm not quite done raising them. They still come to me for advice. And hopefully the older they get, they'll realize that dad's not as mixed up as they thought he was. But it's been ideal. And so this is a really great thing. So no, I never had a full-time litigation job when I had a family.
I'd like to talk a little bit about your glass making and jewelry design and the craft work that you do. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I think that really is a very, very interesting part of your life that is different than most lawyers.
When I finished being a public defender and then went into private practice and then did immigration law in Ohio for a short stint and then returned to San Francisco to do plaintiff side psychotherapy malpractice, which is what I did in a boutique law firm. After about 4 years of that, of civil law with interrogatories, depositions, and very, very difficult adversaries. People, when it's money at stake, people fight even harder. And civil law is in many ways quite uncivil. So I took a workshop at Stained Glass Garden in Berkeley in glass fusing. I had been a shop person in junior high and high school. I had been a split grader where my birth month, those people were going to get held back or go forward, and everybody would start in September, at a certain point, California decided that would be economically, that would be a better deal and cheaper. And so there was consolidation of grades, and the Vietnam War was happening. My parents were opposed to the Vietnam War, and they knew as long as Harlan's in school, he's not going to get drafted. And even though I was like 13 at the time, they said, you're going back, not forward. And to make that more palatable, the school offered what they called enrichment classes. So I got to take nothing but shop classes. And I took metal shop, I took graphic arts, I took electronics, I took plastic shop. And all of that sort of, I guess, made an impact in me, in my soul. And I loved it. I was good with my hands. And then later on, when I was finished with civil law, or finishing, I took a weekend workshop at Stained Glass Garden. And I found while I was doing the work in that beautiful space by 4th Street that my problems, my trial issues, my difficult clients, adversary, all of that sort of disappeared. It was a mental vacation. And it was a wake-up call to me to reconnect with who I was. And that would be a person who enjoyed making things. I took that hint and I pursued it. I took workshops one after the other, and I got better and better at doing glass making, flame work. And then I started to sell my work at craft shows in the city, Union Street, Polk Street, the Castro, the Marin Farmers Market. And it just naturally grew, and the money was good, at times in parity with my wife's income as an attorney, which is hard to believe. And I was an entrepreneur. I controlled pretty much everything about the process, the products, the design, the raw materials, the shows I would book with, gave me a lot of freedom. And I met a lot of people, the people who attended these craft shows, as well as the other vendors, the exhibitors, a remarkable group, both of them. And that's how the transition happened.
You also teach glassmaking and craft. Can you talk a little bit about your teaching of those skills?
As I began to show more and more, and I got better and better, I took over from a teacher of mine at Studio One, which is Oakland's public art studio, and I taught flamework glass there. I also got recruited to teach at the Mendocino Art Center. And then my teacher, April Zilber, who had been at Studio One and who was my first glass bead making teacher, she had been teaching at Oakland Feather River Camp. Now, a lot of listeners may not know, but each of the Bay Area cities back in the 1920s, when modernity was upon us with electrification, the automobile, and the horrors of World War I were still very present in the rear window. City fathers, and I guess today it would be mothers, but people decided that residents needed an outlet in the rural mountains. And so each city set up their own outpost. And Oakland did, I think, in 1922 in Plumas County, and it was called Feather River Oakland Camp. That camp had an art camp component, and my teacher, April Zilber, taught there, and she had told me about it. And at some point I attended as a family camper, and when art camp was happening at the same time, these two groups were together. I saw what it was about, and then the organizer of Feather River Art Camp, Karen Legault, she invited me to teach the following summer for her camp. And I've been doing that for about 15 years now. It's usually the first week in June. People can find it by Googling or looking up featherriverartcamp.org. And there's different classes like paper making and clay, basket making, did I say paper making? I don't want to repeat myself. Just a bunch of different kinds of classes. And my offering is flamework glass beads. And there's painting too, oil painting and watercolor. And that's how I got into teaching. And that's the one workshop that I have kept. And I do that still every year.
Are there any parallels between working as an artisan and working as a lawyer?
Louis, that is such a good question. Thank you. There are, and I don't want to sound crazy, but I see art and poetry and law and obviously in craft. And making a jewel box or a ring or a bracelet, something that shimmers, something that is durable, something that beautifies and embellishes. It's a lot like a trial. And also in the process of selling my work, it's also advocacy. It's creating a sense of credibility, a connection between yourself and your audience, so that they'll be given to buying the thing that you're selling because they like you, they like the work, and they've identified. And I think that's very similar at a deep level to jury work. And I've often thought that with the shows that I've done, it was quite a bit like jury work. Maybe not as important, for sure. And I think that's what also contributed to me wanting to return to the law. That as much as I enjoyed embellishing people's lives and having their faces light up with something beautiful and seeing people gift something to one another as a sign of love, that's a beautiful thing. But it's also beautiful, I think, from a public safety point of view, to hold firm on cases where, violence has been done or injury has been created. Just like as a public defender, it was a beautiful thing to see people exonerated in cases where there wasn't sufficient proof. So I see a huge parallel between the art of the material and the art of trial.
Is there somebody, living or dead, who you'd like to meet?
I think so. I'm fascinated by Jesus. I would love to meet Jesus.
Let's say you had a magic wand and there was one thing that you could change in the legal world or the world in general. What would that be?
I would try to overcome hubris. I think hubris, ego are at the root of human suffering, the suffering that we inflict on each other's because I'm right, you're right, no, I'm right. And now with weapons, it's just gotten scarily out of hand, and we live every day on the precipice of nuclear annihilation.
Let's say you came into some real money, let's say $3 or $4 billion. What, if anything, would you do differently in your life?
Well, I love what I'm doing. I'm not sure I would stop, believe it or not. And I'm fairly new to prosecuting, so I have a lot to learn, and I find the challenge very stimulating. But if I had a lot of money, $3 to $4 billion, I would hire somebody to put out a vocational arts program, probably at something like Feather River Camp, which is a nonprofit summer camp for families and for kids. Especially with children, I would try to teach vocational arts, manual arts, be it just like I had in the public schools, so that people knew how to cut, how to saw, how to polish things, how to pound nails, how to do cabinetry or make little houses. I would roll that out as a model, say with Feather River, and then I would try to scale it further to other partnerships with other places that already had programs to serve especially youth and families. That's one part. The other part that I would do is with this foundation, and I think there's overlap. Since I'm about 20 years old, have believed that this country is sorely in need of a compulsory national service, 18 months at 18 years. And people have a choice to go into environmental corps, urban corps, foreign service corps, and yes, military corps. And everybody needs to do at least a mini module in local policing, so people will understand the problems of crime and problems of policing. But then they can focus on, again, urban or environmental, and nobody gets exempted from it. And I think that would foster the unity that we are lacking now, where there was a common experience between the diverse people that are in our nation. So that would be the second part of a foundation. And that the urban core, for example, would then dovetail potentially with the manual arts component. So that's what I would do with $3 billion.
If someone wanted to get in touch with you, perhaps about the art programs that you teach, the glass making skills that you teach, what would be the best way to find you for those types of things?
The best way to find me would be to Google my name and the word Facebook and Oakland. So Harlan Glass, and Facebook, and you'll get to my Facebook Harlan Glass site and my one summer workshop, which is also accessible via the internet, Googling featherriverartcamp.com and looking up flamework glass. Also on the Facebook page, there's an article that I've written, probably buried fairly deep, but it's called From Mesopotamia to Modernity, which outlines what I've developed as a working hypothesis about the nature of glass, its invention, and what it has enabled humanity to do.
Harlan, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you'd like to touch on, that you'd like to present? Anything at all that you want to discuss?
Well, Louis, I want to thank you. I think you know this, and if you don't, I'll state it here, that you are responsible in part for me being where I am. It was your podcast, Louis, that gave me insight into the Alameda County law community, into the Bay Area and larger goings on here in Northern California. And it put me in touch with some of the most interesting and best practitioners and judges that we have. And that's due to you. This is an amazing resource that you have created and continue to create month after month, now in its fourth season. It's an invaluable store of historic information about the people involved in law practice. We may not always like lawyers, but they sure are interesting. And you've had so many interesting and actually very, very kind and good people on that it's impressive. And what you've done ought to be a class in all law schools. It would be where teachers would make their students listen to 20 podcasts for the quarter, because there's a whole world of education in terms of how people find meaning in their work, how they found their jobs, what they do, what their hopes are. I salute you for this service. Being an amateur historian that I am, I just think this is invaluable, what you've done. I also would like to say that you kind of seem like the Studs Turkel of the law world. Studs Turkel, of course, was an oral historian, and he started out just talking and interviewing people. He also went to law school. He graduated University of Chicago in 1934, but decided to not do it. He passed the bar even in Illinois, and he became a concierge at a hotel, I guess because he loved the stories that people told. So in some ways, you're very much like Studs Turkel, and your oeuvre is increasing season to season. And hopefully, as long as the grid stays up, it'll be available.
Well, Harlan, thank you very much for your kind words. I appreciate it. And thank you so much for joining me today on the Love Thy Lawyer podcast. It really has been a pleasure to talk to you.
Well, I'm very appreciative of your invitation. Thank you so much. Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of Love Thy Lawyer. If you enjoyed listening, please share it with a friend and follow the podcast. If you have comments or suggestions, send me an email. Take a look at our website at lovethylawyer.com, where you can find all of our episodes, transcripts, photographs, and information. Thanks to my guests, and to Joel Katz for music, Brian Matheson for technical support, Paul Roberts for social media, and Tracy Harvey. I'm Louis Goodman.
Let me start this answer again, Louis.